away we go. So, Joshua, I looked you up as well and just like found out a little bit more about you. You're a fashion mogul. You're a designer, bespoke designer. But could you also tell the people who may not be familiar just more about you?
So things about me, I'm also a fitness enthusiast. I also do like some community service actually within the Bronx, which is like gun violence awareness runs. I do partner up with the YMCA in the Northeast region. So I'm known for that. Ran my first marathon back in 2022, the New York Marathon. What else? I would say definitely, like I mentioned before, I'm definitely involved in a lot of community programs or community service events in the Bronx and throughout the New York in general. But I try to keep a lot of that energy focused at home for sure.
That's cool, man. Some of those runnings that you've done, do they take place in the Bronx?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say two major ones is the one that I've orchestrated with the YMCA. And then there's one that's actually on the New York Roadrunners calendar. It's the Bronx 10K. I don't know if you're familiar. It usually happens around, I believe, September. Funny enough, one of my goals is to get the gun violence awareness run on that like actual calendar for the official New York Roadrunners. They do something where you have the opportunity to run a few qualifying races and do a few community services, and that'll get you a position into the New York City Marathon. And I would love for that run to be like a part of that, that process in terms of getting a free spot into the marathon.
Awesome, awesome. And I ran through your IG page. This is also plugged in onto your page, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be
Okay.
there.
And for the people, can you just share your handle for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Damis did it. That's DAMISDIDIT.
Awesome. Thank you. So just to kind of roll into the heavier kind of interview questions connected to those love letters to the Bronx. One of the questions are for you, what is your Bronx utopia? What would that look like?
A Bronx utopia for me is the way I would put this in, like, I guess, for lack of better terms, is a hub with a lot of resources for young Black and brown boys and girls. And what I mean by that is someone who was born and raised in the Bronx, Uptown Bronx, specifically. I feel like growing up, we didn't have access to a lot of resources for different things, right? Like I'll give you an example. We used to have a park on 225th and White Plains Road that used to have like basketball courts and those type of things. And they did renovations while I was growing up, and they removed the basketball courts. From them doing that, I noticed that people didn't really chill in the park anymore. People didn't really come to the park. And it hit me as a child that they did that intentionally, right? Like to get people away from chilling there and hanging out there. And it bothered me as a child, right? Because I'm like, I get that there might be violence or things happening in this area, but instead of giving us a separate hub to go to, they just removed it completely. I will say that I do see it moving in a good direction. Like for example, like I mentioned, there's the new YMCA located uptown. That's something that was unheard of when I was growing up. We didn't have those type of resources where we could get, swimming classes, just a place for after school homework or even, summer jobs. There's a basketball courts in there where now it's a safer environment for, children to come and enjoy time and play and things of that nature. So that's probably what I would say is my like Bronx utopia. I just want it to be a place where people, and not even just to hold it to Bronx kids, right? Like I just want it to be a place where people can see our value. I know that the Bronx holds a lot of values. There's a lot of creatives there, a lot of intelligent people, and I feel like the world would benefit from knowing that. And I feel like a lot of Bronx kids would be able to have their light shine brighter if they had the resources to nourish that as they grew older.
Mm-hmm. So I really like what you're saying about like one that sometimes resources are stripped away in our areas, right? Because I'm also from uptown. So I've seen those things that you're definitely talking about. But it's also important as well to kind of have the resources that we need. So not that it only other people can enjoy it, but also the kids can have hope and want to do more and have that Bronx pride as well. Um, Another question that I kind of want to transition to, being that you're from uptown, could you just give us a little bit of your history of like where you grew up, where did you stay,
Yeah.
what made you still, if you're in the Bronx still, what made you even stay still here?
So I'm originally from, like I said, Uptown Bronx, more so the White Plains Road area. Based between Gun Hill Road, 233rd, that general area. And then what the Bronx was for me growing up was one word I like to use even later in my life. Dialing back to then times is community, right?
Mhm.
I'm Haitian American. Growing up uptown in the Bronx, there weren't many other Haitians that I would see around or get in contact with unless they were my family members visiting. But I was definitely introduced to a heavy like Jamaican culture within the Bronx. And it was cool, honestly, right? Like a lot of my elementary school teachers were Jamaican, where I'd learn certain sayings, empty barrels make the most noise, or those type of cliche things, which gave me like a sense of culture, right? Like it gave me a sense of like, you know, I would say being from a Caribbean island, I would say we have the same morals in a sense, right? And my parents sending me to school and hoping that what they're telling me is being carried out there, I can say it definitely was, right? Like my teachers, they cared about me in a sense of like that nurturing, country aspect of it. Even walking on White Plains Road, you see people, the taxi services where it's like, okay, I know that if I was to call a taxi service, that might be $15, but there's a gentleman under the train that'll get me there for $5 or something like that. Or, my dad was actually one of those guys who, when, growing up, who would do taxi for, women in the neighborhood who needed help with groceries and things like that. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, like my parents are actually pretty involved in the community as well. So, just maneuvering around in my neighborhood, seeing, neighbors come up to me and say like, hey, you've gotten so big, since seeing you as a baby. And I'm like, I don't know you, but it, it feels good to know that someone is telling you that they're proud of you because they've seen you grow. They're telling you that they know your parents. They're telling you, and like I said, with that sense of community, you almost feel safe. Right. Like, so if I'm walking neighborhoods and I'm seeing familiar faces of people who are like saying hello to me constantly, and and then certain street smarts that come with it too that I wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. That I love about Uptown in particular with the Bronx is that I feel like it's perfectly placed in between the busyness of the city, where like as you get closer to Harlem and Manhattan, it's pretty busy. You could take the train anywhere. You don't really need a car. Versus in Uptown, having a car can pretty much be beneficial. We're a little far from things on the train, but we being from up there, you do what you have to do. But being enough to Westchester where you can utilize, let's say a car drive to somewhere close or somewhere where it's a suburban area where you can get other resources. I think that's like been the perfect medium for me. I've been able to rub elbows with, very like honorable, professionals growing up where I got some of that insight on of a different type of, person versus me having the street smarts with, let's say, people who I grew up with on my block, right? Where it may be dangerous there, but it helps me be self-aware in certain environments as I've gotten older.
Mm, mm. Um, I love that. I love that, especially the bit about like what made it a bit comfortable for you, just that aspect of community, um, which I feel like a lot of the times, even with the Bronx pride that we all have, like it ties back into we love our community, we love our people. It allows us to also connect with other groups, which you mentioned about having like a Haitian background and then connecting with the Caribbean side of that. So I really love that just mix of growing up in the Bronx and being open to so much. And then too, at the same time, being so close to everything as well.
Right.
Um, yeah. Could you So for me, that felt like that kind of made Bronx feel like home for you.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. I guess today, like present day, do you still feel like that's there? Do you
Yeah.
feel like the energy is different. Like, yeah, speak to us on that.
Absolutely. I mean, 1000% that I feel like it's still there. You know, a lot of friends that I currently have till this day are from people that I've met in the Bronx, you know, like,
Mhm,
uh, funny enough, I have one of my best friends. He now currently lives in Ohio. I'm the godfather of his son. He
mhm,
moved when we were in fourth, fifth grade, and we've been able to connect. And I mean, this is landline times where he had to call, call my mom's house and ask to speak to me, kind of thing. And we're memorizing each other's number, checking in every 2, 3 months just to make sure that each other's okay. But even till this day, we still connect on those principles. You know, we still connect
mhm,
on like taking the 8 bus here from school, or walking up White Plains Road after school, and and then even to add to that sense of community, we were talking about it the other day where you can go into a random mom and pop restaurant and make your own prices, right? Make your own menu. And I mean that respectfully to these restaurants, right? Like, as a child, you might go in somewhere and say like, hey, can I get a $5 jerk chicken, or can I get a $2 worth of dumpling? And they're not going to turn you away, and it's like that's unheard of, especially being from New York City, where you're going to places where it might cost you $20, $25 for lunch. So being, that young teenager in high school growing up in the Bronx, and you're going to a restaurant, you only have $5 in your pocket, to know that you can get something to eat is it's pretty assuring, you know?
mhm, mhm, mhm. Absolutely, absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. And to
Mhm.
ode to your initial question, I do still consider the Bronx home. I've moved and moved
Repeat
back.
that.
Um,
Repeat that. The audio chopped up a little bit.
okay, you can hear me right now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so just pivoting back to your initial question on how, if I view the Bronx as home, I always do figuratively, and currently, yeah, right now I'm helping my parents move into a home, so I'm back and forth. But absolutely, like, I go there, I still have friends that live in certain places. I still know the gentleman who owns the corner store. I still know the people who own certain restaurants in my neighborhood. And I go in there, and like I mentioned earlier, it's just like family, right? Like, I could go in there, check in, let them know how I'm doing. As you can see, I'm wearing a suit now. And the cool thing I love is, when I do go up to the Bronx, sometimes I could change right before going there, and I try not to, like,
Mhm,
especially after the pandemic, people aren't wearing suits or things like that as much, or people are working remote. But I do think it holds some sort of power, like, arriving in my neighborhood like that, right? Like, there's people who
mhm,
jokingly see me say, hey, Mr. Suits. There's a woman who calls me that. There's kids who I can just see that they're wide-eyed, just noticing like,
mhm,
whoa, this guy's in a suit and he lives on my block. Like, I wonder what he does. Or it just,
mhm.
like, there's not many. Let me not say that there's not many. There's a lot of Bronx professionals, but I know that in some communities it's harder to see people, dressed as I am right now, or working within those type of settings and still living uptown.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Something that I feel like happens often, for some and not all, but those professionals end up relocating and going elsewhere. So sometimes it is hard to kind of capture, um, the other side, everyone else who is still here who has an impact. So I think it is very important that, still show up how you are and just be that representation, because they still might be missing it somehow. But to speak to just how, again, sometimes it feels like professionals do relocate. Do you feel like there's a reason why, there's might be a mass exodus from the Bronx, or typically why people don't want to stay in the Bronx?
Yeah. I'm actually upset that I know the answer. Like, because I talk about this with my friends all the time, and we wish people would stay, or we try to like encourage people to like stay, and like to even host events up there and things like that. But I would say just access, right? Just like access to
Mm,
things earlier. The thing that sucks the most for living uptown is our train. There's only like two direct trains that go to the city, right? And you're getting to Harlem in about, let's say, 45 to an hour, right? Or and then the mid city, you're it's taking an hour and 20 or so. That would that would deter anyone from, if that's your work commute, right? And you have to leave your house, let's say 2 hours before your job time, or you're getting home 2 hours after you finish work. It's understandable that that would drain someone, And then if you're the type of person that drives, it's like you have to pay toll. Well, for the most part, right? Like there's ways around that, but it might add 20 minutes to your commute. But there's a toll to get in and out of it. And other boroughs don't have that issue, right? Like you can go from Queens to Brooklyn or Manhattan to Brooklyn or Queens to, you know what I mean? And without having to worry about it. There's faster train routes depending on where you're going, like if you live in Bushwick, there might be a faster train ride to, let's say financial district versus, the different areas. And that's one thing that even growing up, I think um, our peers who are from Brooklyn or from another borough experience different from us, right? After school, I used to go to the city personally. I was in
Mhm.
school in the Bronx. I used to still take my time, travel down to the city to enjoy the city after school. But to get to college or to meet, my Brooklyn counterparts later on in life, and they're telling me like, yeah, after school, it took us 20 minutes to get to Soho. It took us 15 minutes to get to Soho. I'm like, I can only imagine what that experience was like.
Mhm.
Um, so now it being, X amount of years later, I'm out of high school and thinking like, someone who goes to my old, my alma mater, they're still facing that, right? Like if they want to go to Manhattan after school and experience the city or anything, it's still that long ride. A parent might not even be happy with that. And I think that setup, it ends up formulating um, a mindset, right? Like I have friends
Mhm.
till this day who don't want to go to the city, right? Like
Mhm.
if it's late night where they can easily find a parking, or if it's not Sunday where parking is free, or if they know there won't be a lot of traffic, they try to avoid the city, right? They end up going. So you have Bronx people who either go to Brooklyn, Queens, or wherever to be closer to the city, or you have people who they now work remote or something of that nature, and then they go up to Westchester to find, maybe more peace, or like even an easier. It's weird because there's even an easier commute sometimes from Westchester if you're taking the Metro North. So I know this is a like shot in the dark statement to make, because who knows if this can be a change or one day how long it would take. But I think if there were more direct train lines to the city, where maybe it'll cut out all the fluff from, like, let's say East 180th, or even from like a Gun Hill or something like that, where there's like just pivotal stops. I do
Mhm.
think a lot more people would find themselves coming to the Bronx. Also, being that now we're probably one of the last boroughs to be fully gentrified, and I feel like we're the only borough left right now where you can go and get a full 100% authentic, New York experience today versus what it might have been 20 years ago.
Right. Right. Um, what you said speaks volumes. I do think a lot of it is access to, whether there's access to transport, access to healthy foods, access to, third spaces, like you were mentioning earlier. The basketball court was removed at some point. People want to go out and hang out somewhere, not to cause trouble, you know what I mean, but just access to being somewhere, you know what I mean. So I do think and agree with you that access is a huge part of it. Um, because that was one of my next questions. What kind of changes do you feel need to happen in order to get that access? But something that you touched on was like, maybe more a direct route, or
Right.
like Long Island has HOV lanes, something
Right.
like that.
That'd actually be cool. But to add to that, and I think I'm honestly, I tell people all the time, like, I feel like humbly, like I'm one of the leaders of the new school, right? And what I mean by that is like I see a lot of my peers doing what I think needs to be done, right? And what I mean by that is like the events being, first of all, I think like events being thrown in the Bronx, and things like monuments, you know, uh, having light shined upon them in the Bronx is very imperative right now. This had went to an event. I'm pretty sure you've heard of it, the McFly Fest, right? One of my counterparts, Muggsy, hosts that, and it's just important to see, right? Like I said, it's a childhood experience, or it's an adult experience to where, maybe somebody didn't hear about it because it's in the Bronx, but when you see the recap, you're like, whoa, where did this happen? Like this can happen, this like in the Bronx that exists, or um we have a art museum in the Bronx that people don't know about, the hip hop museum, you know what I mean? The City Island, it's we have like a lot of things in the Bronx that are like unique to the Bronx. And
Mm, mm,
think if more events were held in the Bronx, if more like community engagement was done within the Bronx, it would help bring light to it, right? Because what needs to be shown is the value, right? People know that the Bronx is there, but the question is like, why am I going there? And the reason
mm,
why the why is so strong compared to another borough is, as I mentioned earlier, is it's a cost, right? You have to pay to get there. You're right. Like even if you're driving, there's a toll. So you're like, it's not the most money, but living in New York, you're gonna ask yourself, like, what am I paying 12.50 for to go to the Bronx right now for? Or why am I gonna spend this time to go there? And I feel like if more light would be shined on, the artifacts that we do have, I feel like it would help encourage people to come experience the Bronx.
mm, mm. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, that is gonna segue into this next question as well, because you mentioned this light having to be shown on some of these things that are here naturally and already. But to bring that value to it, it has to be highlighted in some way. Do you see the Bronx as an untapped utopia?
Ooh, yeah, and I say yes, but it's very weird. And the reason why I call
Mm,
it because the still gets its credentials, right? Like for example, we're the home of hip hop. And it's like for how heavy hip hop shifts our culture in general, right? Like anything we do in terms of marketing or in terms of uh to be honest, any movement for anything at all usually resorts back to like hip hop and like our culture. And to know that the Bronx is home of that, it's like that's definitely like untapped space in itself, right? um I do think like a lot of the things that I'm mentioning, like this theory has even become more popular that the Bronx has the best Caribbean food, like out of all of the boroughs, the best Jamaican food. You said you're from Uptown. I know you know about Tropical Bakery, the best beef patties. I've seen
oh,
outsiders. Yeah, like I've seen, ever since, the Keep Leave movement and all of these food reviews, I've even seen a lot of people come up there to like say that's the best beef patty they've ever had. And that's up the block for me. Like I grew
mm,
up every weekend with my family. If my mom didn't want to cook, she would go grab those patties. And I love seeing that viral TikTok video. I love people saying like, "Hey, I need to make a trip to go there," and things like
mm,
that. And even as I'm speaking to you, like I'm getting like concept in my mind. We could have a Bronx food festival, right? Like there can be certain things, or like a Bronx hip hop festival. Like there's just certain things. Like shout out to Spike Lee. He does, his block party in Brooklyn. And
mm,
I just say tip my hat off to some Bronx, celebrities or people in higher positions, because I do feel like there are people who are doing their due diligence, right? Like people like Swiss Beats, I do know that he does make it a thing to do things in the Bronx to come show, Bronx creatives loves. So, I tip
mm,
my hat, but I do think like a lot of that, more of that needs to be done on a mass scale.
mm,
But as I before, I do think that my peers who I'm like networking across with or who I'm growing alongside of, we're currently doing that now. So it may be where we're doing the groundwork, and God willing, we can see, the fruits of our labor. But
mm,
if not, if we're able to like just put things in position to where the Bronx would be better off, for the long term, it's happy and it's an honor to be a part of that growth.
mm. Right, absolutely. Heavy on the events, heavy on the showcasing, heavy on the growth because we need more of it. There's people who are doing it, but we definitely need more of it.
Right.
And get everyone from everywhere to come out, not just the Bronx, but all five boroughs, all of New York City, um, which is beautiful when has been done by like the Swiss Beats and et cetera, et cetera. Um, a question. We're almost at the end, but I have like two or three more questions.
Okay.
Um, how does because I read somewhere that your mom was an influence on you with like the fashion. How does your mom, the Bronx, like tie into who you are?
That's a good question. So it's like a part of everything I'm explaining as an adult. I had the opportunity to view that as a child first, right? Like meaning like my mom growing up within the fashion industry, she would still work in Manhattan, right? And I would still hear her complain about like how long it took her commute to get to the garment district and things like that. But I would say the thing that helped me the most with that was when I would tag along with her. My mom would show me a lot of gems, right? Like, so if I would go with her, let's say down to work and see like, things in the garment district, my mom also showed me a lot of things in the Bronx that were like little loopholes for that, right? Like fabric stores within the Bronx, the fabric is substantially cheaper. And it could be the exact same thing. And it's just location. There's actually a big, I believe it's Gramerton. That's a Mount Vernon block. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
fabric store over there that's like actually pretty popular. Just seeing certain things like that within my community, it definitely like helped me a lot. And it's cool too because, in a sense, my fashion sense, of course, it comes from my mother, but to balance it out, it also comes from the Bronx, right? Like a lot of you know walking to and from school or, traveling with my mom. My mom, it was hard to convince a Caribbean immigrant the importance of wardrobe, right? The importance of having sneakers or so many, right? But I feel like my mom was very open-minded in terms of like understanding the culture that I was growing into while still teaching me, what she was accustomed to and what she was learning as she was here as well. So, whether that be, going to church on Sunday and, seeing what my mom would choose to put on versus what other people were putting on, like my mind would always go there. And even once again, to give an ode to the Jamaican culture that I grew up within, being from the Bronx, mesh marinas, cut off, foot pants, those type of things that I'm
Mhm.
seeing that have eventually grown to become popular, right? Or with like, let's say, once again, the hip hop culture collaborating with that said dance hall era. We saw that back in like what 2016 or so. When that was happening and the world was picking it up, it was cool to be like, wow, like I saw this a long time ago growing up in the Bronx. So I would say that's probably like the biggest way that intertwined.
Mm, mm. Um, Thank you so much for that, Josh.
No
What
problem.
what message, if you could, what message could you give or would you give to like young fashion professionals who are from the Bronx who want to make like a mark in their industry?
Um, be patient. And like just trust your journey, right? Like, and I would say obstacles are the way, right? I would say combining those three thoughts, and I'll elaborate. Um, Once again, like being from the Bronx, there's not many outlets, so it can seem like that window of opportunity is very, very small. But I feel like it comes off small because of the expectation of time, right? Like what time will how soon will I achieve this dream or this goal that I want to accomplish? And I think being patient, right, and once again, obstacles are the way, right? Like I love everything about my journey, right? But had you had asked me that when I was a teenager, I might have gave you a million excuses of why it was difficult. So those things that I might have saw as obstacles or things that were like really like infiltrating me or blocking me from my blessings were actually blessings in a sense, right? And um, I think another thing too for young professionals that I like hold tight onto, and I mentioned this a few times throughout this interview, is networking across, right? Like, don't underestimate, like they might be looking up now and seeing me and my counterparts as like those people from the Bronx who they might idolize and say like, hey, like those are the people who I need to get next to, or like I need to talk to get out of here, or to to change my situation. But it's really the people sitting next to you, like all of my friends who have accomplished many things within the Bronx space. It's like we were once just those kids who were just creatives uptown, like stuck uptown, and we want to do creative things. We get together and huddle up and talk about all these amazing dreams we'd have. And I say don't lose sight in that, because it does expand your network, and you can grow together, right? Like the people who you're sitting next to in these classrooms, or the people from your block who are just as interested in these things as you. Don't underestimate the power of growing together, and that the journey can eventually reach a point to where you're satisfied.
Mm. I like that. I'm big on pushing through your obstacles to, see that it is a blessing or just to get through the other side. And again, networking, huge thing to everything that we do because we can't do it by ourselves all the time. It is very imperative that we can grow. Back to something that you were saying again, just about growing and expanding. You do need other people sometimes to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, man. Our last question. Sad to see you go, right? But our last question for today is: if you could write a love letter to the Bronx, what would it say?
What would it say? So I'd say, let's see. Uh, Dear Bronx, thank you for everything. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being soft but tough at the same time, right? Thank you for your balance. Um, Thank you for just being different, right? Thank you for being the outsider that made me defend you, right? Like, thank you for being the borough that just is just flowing with culture. Um, and man, I can't thank the Bronx enough for like who I am today and everything that it's shown me. Like I am so appreciative of, yeah, like I can go on, like I can get like it could get me emotional. I can't lie. Like I love everything about the Bronx, right? Like as I mentioned, I went to a Catholic high school, all boys school, and I was able to see all facets of a gentleman that can come from any part of the Bronx, right? Like I'm talking about South Bronx, North Bronx, and meeting their parents. And I feel like that was when I got the full rush of understanding what the Bronx entails. And there's so much pride in coming from the Bronx that, no matter where you go in the United States and the world, it's like you want to specify, like, I'm from the Bronx, New York. I'm not just from New York. And I just want to thank the Bronx for giving me that sense of pride, for sure.
Hey, man. Thank you so much. That was beautifully said, beautifully spoken. Thank you to the Bronx. Thank you to our communities. Just thank you for being beautiful, but hard, but delicate, but soft. But just thank you.
Right.
I love that,
Absolutely.
man. Just out of curiosity, I'm done with the interview now. But what high school did you go to?
Mount St. Michael.
Get out of here! I'm alumni as well, man.
Yes,
What
sir.
year you grad? Yeah, what year you
Uh,
graduated?
2011.
Okay, I graduated '07.
Oh, 07. Okay, so I was just getting in. I was a freshman.
Yeah, freshman. Yeah. That's beautiful. Small world, small world,
Yeah.
small world.
So you know that
Um,
you can attest to what I'm
right,
saying.
right, right. No, absolutely. Because once you said that, I was like, I resonate with that, and I'm like, for me and my experience going to Mount, because everybody wants to, oh, I want to be around ladies, I want to be around, co-ed, but it, and then when you tell people you go to all boys school, oh, you went to all boys school, I'm like, yeah, it wasn't all of that, it wasn't bad, but you build character, you build brotherhood, and I didn't like me personally, I didn't have no brothers. I come from a large woman family, so I'm like, those things spoke to how I can navigate in the world and how I can move in the world. Um, so yeah, I definitely feel you, man.
Absolutely. Like same. I have no brothers. And my dad was like
Oh,
always working. You know what I mean? So my dad was a great give me those words of wisdom. He would be there when he could be, but he had two jobs and would juggle. You know what I mean? So my first, but like my real like introduction to like manhood was I feel like in high school. Like it's like my peers, we were raising each other. You know,
right, right,
like I spoke to approach a woman to ask her to like date. Like it was
right.
my peers helping me. Like, oh, what should I say? Like, how should I go about? My dad didn't get a chance to really do that. But like I said, you understand the pride that comes with it, and like everything that I'm
Yeah,
saying. So you're very diverse as a school, you know.
right,
Um,
right. From
and it's
everywhere, everybody from everywhere.
every, I mean, like culturally heavy too. Like you'll have like Albanians, Italians here, this and that, and then
Everybody.
we're just sharing the culture with each other. You know, I met a
Mm-hmm.
I have a coworker, they're Albanian, literally, and they tell me, you know, hey, I'm Albanian, whatever, and I'm there telling them stuff about their culture, and they're like, you know, how do you know that? And I'm Bronx,
Right, right, right. Melting. It was a crazy melting pot, bro. You just
right,
learn so much. Learn so much.
right.
Joshua, brother, thank you so much. It was a great opportunity to get to meet you.